Hey guys, Tech Rally here, and welcome to the second lesson of how I see code as a software engineer. In this lesson, we're going to be going over CSS, Cascading Style Sheets. Cascading Style Sheets is a style sheet language used to describe the presentation of a document written in HTML or XML. CSS describes how elements should be rendered on the screen, on paper, in speech, or in other media. CSS is one of the core languages of the open web and is standardized across web browsers according to the W3C specification. In short, CSS is one of the three foundations of building web applications, and in this case, it's going to revolve around styling your application. In the first lesson, we learned about HTML, and in this lesson, we're going to be talking about how we could style those elements that we created in the previous lessons to give it more life. Let's look at the code and see how that works. Before we start, I think looking at the W3 school example on CSS would be a great start. If you did the first lesson, you'll know that the structure of this HTML file is very similar to the one we did before, but now we added this style tag here. And what the style tag represents is the ability to write CSS on your HTML application. The first style that is introduced is styling the body tag. Remember, the body tag is where we write the body of our content application. And in here, we change the background color to light blue. We could change this background color to something else like red and run the application, and it'll change the color of the body. We could change it back to light blue here just to see the changes. Perfect. The next thing that the example does is changing the styles on the H1 header tag. Here we made the color white and text align to the center. So imagine if we remove this one here and we run it again, then it's going to be aligned to the left. Let's revert this back and leave it text align center. The last styling we do is the P tag, where we give it a font family of Verdana and give it a font size of 20 pixels. This is perfect, and you can see there's a H1 tag here, and there's a P tag, and the document that's shown is matching to what our HTML structure is. This is great, but I want to show you a couple of gotchas about CSS styling. It happens in sequential order, so imagine if I create another P style here, and I change this to font size 14 pixels and run it. It's going to change the paragraph tag to 14 pixels, even though we said that the font size of the P tag was 20 pixels. So whatever happens at the end is what is going to be most adopted. This is a complicated concept to understand for a lot of new developers because sometimes you have overriding styles and you don't really know where it's coming from. Another example I could show you here is that maybe I can make the H1 and instead I'll change the color to black and run it. Cool. So you'll notice that the color of the H1 tag changed, but the text align is still centered. What this means is that CSS will always try to match everything in order, but also try to keep the previous styles as much as possible. So since these two conditions are overriding each other, the color that happens at the end will take into effect, which is black, but we will still have the text align to center. But imagine if we say text align left, and save that, then this style here will override the first styles here. We can actually even open up our Google Inspector tools, and I'll show you what exactly is happening. I opened up my Google Inspector tool by pressing Command Option I, or also you can do is click Inspect here, and it'll open up this window on the side for you. If we look at this H1 tag here, you'll notice that we have both CSS styles showing. The H1 with the color black, text align left, and then the H1 with the color white, text align center. But you'll notice that there's a scratch mark over the original first styles here, and it's because the new styles of H1 is overriding the old styles. If I remove this one here and run the application, inspect this element again, you'll notice that the H1 color white and text align center is properly showing up. So in summary, you have to be really careful about overriding styles, and overriding styles generally happen in terms of priority. So depending on how you write your CSS, the web application will show dependent on those priority lists. I think this was a great example of showing the basics of CSS, but generally when you're building web applications, unless you're doing global styles, you don't necessarily want to do stylings on the tag itself. What you want to do is style your tags based on your class names and ID. So what are class names and ID? If we go into the W3 School definition for classes, the class attribute specifies one or more class names for an element. The class attribute is mostly used to point to a class in a style sheet, but however, it could also be used in JavaScript. I just want to focus on this part here, and what that means is that we can be able to style our elements based on the class name. The next way we can also style our elements is by using the ID attribute. And the ID attribute specifies a unique ID for an HTML element. The value must be unique within the HTML document. So generally, using ID and classes are the way to go when adding attributes to an element to style. The major difference between the ID and a class is that IDs are supposed to be unique attributes, while classes can be a general shared attribute amongst different elements. Let's follow up from our example from the previous lesson and start adding attributes to our elements, and I'll show you the difference between styling using just the element tags versus using the class names. I took the liberty of already creating an index.html file under a CSS folder, and what I did was I just copied and pasted from the original index.html of the first lesson. The first thing we're going to do is create a style tag above, similar to the example that we saw. And in here, before we write any code, let's look at our two div containers. We're going to add a couple of attributes to this container called class equals movie container. And then let's add another class here called class equal movie container. To apply a style to a class, you need to use the dot notation. So what we're going to say here is say dot movie container. And notice that we're not applying a style to a tag, but on the class name. Movie container is supposed to be a general common shared styles. What I want to do is make sure that both of these containers have that same style. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give it a background color of light blue. Let's save this and open our index.html file in our terminal. In our terminal, I'm in my root directory and I'm going to cd into the CSS file. And then I'm going to open index.html. So when I open up the browser, you can see that the blue background is being applied to both containers. And that's because we called each container with a class attribute of movie container. Let's say I want some unique style just on the movie summary and the movie rating. How do we make those changes? In this case, it's good to use the ID attribute. Let's look at the code. In the code, I'm going to apply an ID attribute to the movie summary and the movie rating. So here I'm going to write ID equals movie summary. And here I'm going to say ID equals movie rating. To style each container independently using IDs, we're going to use the pound symbol for IDs. So here we could say movie summary. And let's give it a border of 1 pixel, solid, and we'll say red. And for the movie rating, let's give it a border of 1 pixel, solid, and maybe we could just give it green. Awesome. Now that we've applied these styles, the movie summary border should be red and the movie rating border should be green. Let's look at our browser. When I refresh the browser, perfect. We see that the movie rating of Harry Potter is green and the movie summary of Harry Potter is red. If you notice, these containers are a little bit stuck together, and what you can do is now apply some styles to the ID element of the movie summary of Harry Potter. Maybe we'll give it a little bit of a margin on the bottom. So going back to the code, on the movie summary here, let's give it a margin bottom of about 10 pixels. Going back to the browser when I refresh the page, now we have that nice separation. And as you can see, there are ways you can manipulate your code based on the class and ID name. There are some caveats, just like the example in the W3 schools when styling your code, like overriding styles, ID versus class name priority, and stuff like that. But I hope that this showed you a general idea of how CSS can work when using HTML and CSS together. In the next lesson, I'm going to start introducing you to some JavaScript concepts by starting off with variables. So far, we've knocked out 2 out of the 3 foundations of building web applications. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. If you like content like this, hit that like and subscribe. I'll talk to you in the next lesson. See you then.